Welcome back to Specter of Torment. Last time we recruited Treasure Knight and Polar Knight, as well as seeing exactly what the deal was in literal terms between the Enchantress and Donovan. Basically, he was on the brink of death, and she extended his life in exchange for him recruiting 8 knights for her, and once he did, his keepsake locket would gain the power to turn him back into a human, I suppose. For now, we're going after the 7th knight on our list, well technically the 8th, but the 7th one that we're recruiting, Propeller Knight. And I probably could have not used the ghostly garb in this stage. This is a bit harder, well actually quite a lot harder than the Polar Knight stage, which was considered one of the easiest according to the game developers, since they only gave you 1,000 gold for beating it as opposed to the 3,000 gold for this stage. But I think I'm skillful enough at this game to where I don't need any other armors. If you don't have as much confidence in your skills as I do, though, then you're probably going to want to use the Cloak of Clemency in this stage. If you have about as much health and darkness as I do, then the Cloak of Clemency is pretty much going to be your best friend. I did explain how it works previously. If you fall into a pit or into spikes, then you'll be revived at the cost of some will and darkness. And with as much as I have right now, including this Willful Wisp that's pretty much at the beginning of this stage and isn't hard to get at all, you can probably get 2 extra chances before actually falling into a pit and triggering a game over, or rather, triggering the loss of a life. There are new pea-hat looking enemies. I say they look like pea-hats because they have the propellers on their heads, and they're basically filling the same function as pea-hats do in later games, where in, say, Zelda Skyward Sword or Twilight Princess, they're mostly used as targets for your claw shot rather than actually being enemies. And in this game, they don't really do anything to harm you. They're targets for your dash slash, and that's pretty much all they do. This mini-boss here is made really easy with the Shadow Mirror curio. The reason why is because if you have the right distance from it, you can actually get 2 hits in on it with just 1 slash. And if you have the Raiment of Risk special ability activated, then you probably get 3 hits in on it with just the 1 slash if you have the right distance. The distance is probably easier to get if you don't have the upgraded version of the Shadow Mirror, because it sticks closer to you than the upgraded version does. And this section of the game, when I saw it in the trailers, is probably what convinced me that I really wanted Specter of Torment. Like, just seeing that you can slice the huge cannonballs in half, when I saw that in the trailers, I guess in my head I was like, oh yeah, Specter Knight uses an actual weapon. And I mean, I guess a shovel and bombs can also be considered weapons, but most people associate those with gardening tools and not really, I guess, close range weapons or multi-use weapons. That's mostly considering the bombs. You don't really consider those as things that are very perishable. Or that aren't perishable, rather, because Plague Knight uses them in an unlimited amount. Either way, Specter Knight using a blade, essentially, was just so cool to me. When I was young, I used to really like swords, and I kind of still do, I guess. And that's because of the Zelda series. I grew up with that series when I was young, and Link wielded a sword, so I was just like, wow. Swords are pretty flippin' cool. And a scythe is pretty much as close as it gets to a sword with the current playable characters. And by current, I mean, you know, Shovel of Hope, Specter of Torment, and Plague of Shadows. And also, the gash that's made in the cannonballs was just so cool to me, because like you could see the heat in where the slash was. Like, Specter Knight is moving so fast that he causes the I don't know, the friction between the blade and the metal of the cannonball to like make some heat or something like that. I don't know. It's just cool, alright? Specter Knight is cool. Back onto the level itself, you're probably going to be using the hover plume a lot if you do have it, and it can be used to skip a bunch of sections, like for example, right here. Considering that the wind is blowing you to the right, you can use the hover plume to get a lot of distance. It doesn't really give you much horizontal distance, and the vertical distance it does give you is gotten very slowly, so it's not all that useful for skipping over sections unless you're willing to waste a lot of darkness. But since the wind was blowing at your back and pushing you forward, you could actually get a lot of distance with the hover plume, which was pretty cool. I didn't use it though. It was my most used curio in my first playthrough of the game. I think I might have said that already, but now I've come to appreciate the Dread Talon even more. And in this section the fans are blowing you back, so you have to be careful, because at the bottom there's spikes there and you gotta time your jumps and such. Not too difficult of a platforming challenge. You want to give yourself as much time as possible by running toward the fans after destroying that dirt block, or I don't know what to call those blocks. I guess the regular ones are called dirt blocks, the other ones are called sand blocks, the ones that you just fall through, and those would be rock blocks? I don't know, whatever. We're at the boss, pretty much. And I've pretty much said all I need to say about the stage, so I guess I'll get to talking about the boss. Propeller Knight, when he starts off, looks very similar to the original version of the fight. You're just essentially having a fencing battle with him. You can slash whenever he does his forward dash, because Specter Knight does gain a little bit of invulnerability when he performs his ground slash. As you see there, I was pretty much slashing through his and not taking any damage while he was. But after a little while, I don't think it has anything to do with it, Propeller Knight's health. He will destroy the platform that you're standing on with cannonballs, and instead you go into this free-falling section, where you're pretty much riding on these tiny airships. I say pretty much because you can avoid the airships entirely, actually, if you decide to use the hover plume. And that's what I'm going to be doing right now. Because the hover plume allows you to float, and you're already floaty in this section, you could get a lot of air with the hover plume. And if you use it and just constantly fly toward Propeller Knight and continuously slash at him, it makes for a pretty easy boss fight. He does have similar moves to previously, where he will use the fan on his head to draw you or bombs toward him. He'll still do his dashing slashes. If he falls down into the bottomless pit below, he won't take any damage, he'll just reappear at the top of the screen. But if you fall into the pit at the bottom of the screen, you'll actually die. Unless you've already beaten the boss. Once you do beat the boss, you're pretty much safe from there on. But it's kind of inconsistent, because in the Kratos boss fight for the PS4 version of Shovel Knight, when Kratos or when Shovel Knight falls off the stage, they both take 2 dots of damage. They don't die, and they don't take 0 damage. But in this one, Propeller Knight does not take damage at all, and you instantly die, so it's kind of unfair in that way. But we beat him, and now we are getting the final curio, which is the Judgment Rush. It's this weird jewel thing that makes it so that you play a little bit even more like Specter Knight did in his boss fight. You press the curio button and Specter Knight will float in the air temporarily. Once he's finished charging, I guess you could call it, he will rush to the nearest enemy and slash through them. The attack does more damage than the regular Scythe slash. I think it does 2 damage. It's like a whole dot on bosses. So it's pretty cool. The upgraded version makes it so that the charge time is lessened and you have invincibility frames when charging it. I think you are invincible when you, what was it? You're invincible when you're actually dashing at the enemy, but not while you're charging it. And the charge does take a little while to start. But since you get invincibility and faster charge time with the upgraded version of the curio, that becomes a non-issue really. It's pretty useful for normal enemies, especially considering they're pretty static, they don't move around a lot, but some bosses, it's gonna get pretty impossible to hit them with the Judgment Rush. So, I would recommend not really using it for bosses, unless you're using it to gain height if the boss is flying through the air or something like that. Right now, I'm going to swap back to the Raiment of Risk because I want to use it for the upcoming level. It is technically the most difficult level in the game, so I see myself as justified in using this. And this is a very interesting cutscene, this start to the endgame territory. Donovan and Black Knight both thought that the Enchantress and Shield Knight were two different people, with Black Knight, I guess, not knowing what the Enchantress looked like and Specter Knight just not putting two and two together. Though I guess Black Knight and Shield Knight do have history, so it makes sense that he'd recognize her face, while Donovan only saw her once when he fought her. And Black Knight, as with the other campaigns, wants to try and save her, but not fight her, I guess just negotiate. But Specter Knight has a lot more animosity toward her. He doesn't want to save her, he wants to pretty much kill her. He believes that Shield Knight is the cause of all of his problems. She is kind of the reason he took out his anger on Luan, the reason he and Luan lost their lives, and kind of why he's a zombie right now. And also, Reize is kind of under her servitude as a slave, and Luan is related to Reize, if you couldn't tell already. So, Donovan has a lot of reasons to have a grudge against the Enchantress here. So, of course, he's gonna go after her. And also, the Dark Acolyte came back, which was pretty neat, thanks to that hole that Black Knight created in the floor. This stage is actually the final, like, I guess, final stage. So it's basically the final stage before the final stage, I guess we could say. I don't know, that was a weird sentence. Either way, unlike the other campaigns which had 2 stages before the final boss, this one only has 1. Which is kind of interesting. I guess because you already started out in the tower, they felt that they didn't need to have 2 stages. It wouldn't really make any sense. Even though this stage is also called the tower entrance. But whatever, it's the final stage, it's the culmination of all the things that you've learned up to this point, and it even mixes up some of the, I guess, gimmicks from the other levels. For example, here we have King Knight's books that reveal hidden platforms, or rather, create platforms for you to use, and we have Mole Knight's fish that pop up and you can dash slash off of in order to gain distance and height. So they're kind of mixing 2 of the level gimmicks together with this. The Judgment Rush is pretty good for platforming. I avoided basically that entire bed of spikes just there by using the Judgment Rush to kill the magician at the far end. And we have the other darker version of the Griffin. You can't just kind of skip past him by using the Judgment Rush to fly through him. You will take a bit of damage, but it does mean getting by faster, which is pretty cool. And of course, like the other Griffins, well, the other red Griffins in the other campaigns, rather than dropping food, he instead drops a bomb, which is kind of lame. Although I don't really need food right now, considering I'm using the Raiment of Risk, which means I don't have that much health to recover, and a Will Skull will pretty much do the job for me. And there was food in the next room, so I didn't really need to use the Will Skull in the first place, but whatever. I used it. Unlike the other stages, well, the other endgame stages, I should say, there's no boss rush in this one. You're not fighting all of the Knights of the Order of No Quarter. Instead, it's just a straight shot to the end, where you fight, of course, Black Knight, as he's always the boss for the Tower of Fate entrance stage in all 3 of the campaigns. Here we have some more of the mixing of level gimmicks. We have the switches from Polar Knight stage, And at the end, we'll have the P-Hat enemies. I don't know their official name, I just keep calling them P-Hats. From Propeller Knight stage. I like this combination of gimmicks rather than just having them be isolated. Although they are kind of a little separated from each other. They're in the same room. So I guess that's what counts for a combination for me. Another combination will be coming up shortly. We have the Waterworks from Plague Knight stage, and we have these Tombstone enemies from the Lich Yard. This stage only has 5 red skulls, unlike all the other ones which have 10, and the hub area which has 3. So that means the final area where we have the final boss that we're going to fight only has 2... Excuse me, I had like a weird voice crack thing. Only has 2 red skulls in it. Sadly, that does mean that, kind of like with the music sheets in... I was going to say Specter Knight's campaign. In Shovel Knight's campaign, you're going to have to revisit the game in order to get the reward for collecting everything. Then again, there wasn't really a reward for getting all of the stuff in Shovel Knight's campaign. It was more in Plague Knight's campaign, where if you get all the Cipher coins, you're able to unlock the Pandemonium Chalice and the Pandemonium Cloak, I believe they were called. And here we have some more gimmicks fusing together. We have the Specter Knights, well, not Specter Knight, the Lich Yards, invisible walls that appear once you come in contact with them. And we have the giant fish that takes away a lot of your health from Treasure Knight stage. I wish this fish didn't respawn when you killed it, because, as I said, you can kill it with the Dread Talon if you hit it a couple times, but eventually it will come back, which is kind of annoying. I feel like if you took the time to actually defeat the fish, it shouldn't have to come back, but whatever. It's not too big of a challenge to where I'll actually die from it. Of course, that is just me being cocky, as I have been, destroying all the checkpoints and not dying. But I have the right to be cocky, okay? I'm getting all the feats for being extra cool and stuff like that, so... yeah. And this final area is pretty much reminiscent of Tinker Knight's final area, where you're just climbing up the tower until you get to the end where you have to fight the boss. There's not really any mixing, well actually that's a lie. There's the Mall Knight bouncy lanterns, goo lanterns is what I called them originally, yes. So while you're climbing the tower you have to use these to achieve extra height as well. And this section right here with the swinging lanterns is actually pretty difficult to get past, so I just use the hover plume instead to cheese my way past it. And now we have one final section. I almost said section, where we're just grinding toward the final area. There's not really any obstacles after those first blue fire things, so pretty easy to get past without taking damage. And you have food at the end to recover your health, along with a couple of those darkness pots, I guess you could call them. Well, they're more like bubbles than anything else. Of course, at the end is Black Knight. And he's pretty unique this time around. Terrapin can fly for some reason. I don't know how that works, but whatever. And I got hit while having the barrier lantern out. That's kind of annoying. If some projectiles can squeeze between your barrier lantern, they will get through and hit you and the barrier lantern will dissipate. Which I understand that it makes sense to do that, I just wish it didn't. Either way, some of the moves he has, he can stomp down on Terrapin to cause it to create shockwaves. He can gather up a bunch of projectiles and then shoot them all at you. What else? There's the flying, of course. While he is flying, I would recommend either using the Judgment Rush or the Hover Plume to get to him. For the Hover Plume, you want to jump out a wall, climb it pretty much, and then jump off of it and use the Hover Plume after you've jumped off to gain maximum height. You can also instead use the Judgment Rush. If you were to do that, then you'll instantly achieve the height that you need. You'll probably miss Black Knight, it's not all that accurate, as I've said before, especially with moving targets like Black Knight. But it'll get you to his height in an instant, so it's pretty useful. And it costs less than the Hover Plume, as I recall, so you can use the Judgment Rush first, and then go into the Hover Plume and start floating around near him, to have more time in the air to dash slash him. It's kind of awkward trying to attack him on the ground, so I think trying to dash slash him while he's on top of Terrapin is really the best way to go. And we got the checkpointless feat. I didn't mention it before, but we also got the, I think it was Inhuman Resources feat for talking to everyone in the hub area. So that's pretty neat. With that done, we're pretty much set up for the finale. I'm gonna swap back to the original cloak because this is a prequel. I need to keep things canon to the, you know, the Shovel of Hope or whatever. With Shovel Knight and Plague Knight, I can wear whatever armor I want because that was the end of their tales. But Specter Knight, this isn't the end for him. He, of course, reappears in the other campaigns, so, you know. Either way, I'm also turning in a bunch of the red skulls. After you buy all the curios from Red, he'll ask you to bring any red skulls to him that you find, and he'll give you a lot of money for them. Like, I'm not sure if it's 1,000 gold or 2,000 gold. It's a lot, alright? He gives you a lot of money for each red skull. You can, however, after you've gathered a bunch of skulls, find his Scarlet. It's like a glowing skull, and it appears randomly in the levels. Well, not really randomly. I think it's after you collect a certain amount, it will appear in whatever level you choose next. Something like that. Either way, after you find it, you'll be able to take her to Red. Red will revive her, and you'll get your dance sequence for the game. We don't have any Troupple King here, so we'll have to deal with Red and Scarlet doing their little jig. And of course, I gotta keep Specter Knight in character, so I gotta give them the cold shoulder the whole time. I think the music for this little sequence here is actually a faster mix of the song that plays when you're testing out a curio after you buy it from Red. So it's kind of neat to hear that leitmotif, if you can call it a leitmotif, reappear again. If you don't know what a leitmotif is, it's basically like when you take a song and kind of create another mix with it. I don't know exactly how to describe it. I guess an easy example would be Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where the first zone has like a bass song and the second zone is kind of a remix of that song that kind of uses parts of the bass song. It's a weird advanced word to use that I probably shouldn't have used. Either way, next time on Specter of Torment, we're going to be heading to the final level, the Tower of Fate quadruple question mark, where we will be defeating the Enchantress. Definitely not once and for all, because this is a prequel. Of course we can't actually do that.